Hi, I'm Naomi Hall, and I'd like to welcome you to our virtual summit on stress management for educators. My whole goal with this summit is to provide you with powerful steps that you can take to reduce your own stress and find quality time for yourself and your family. Because I know from experience, when you are stressed, anxious, overwhelmed, there is no quality time, and you can't find it, and you can't find a way to make it. And it's important. So today I have with me Jesse Coomer, who is one of the foremost voices in the world on breath work. However, he spent most of his life as a mess of stress and anxiety. And he suffered from what he has dubbed the modern human condition, a condition that you probably are dealing with too. And in 2009, he began a life transformation mission that led him to discover how physiology and psychology often conflict with the modern world and each other. So, Jesse, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I am a personal fan of breath work. I came across it several years ago working with mindfulness with my students, and I'm excited to learn a little bit more about it from you. So, you've had an interesting journey. You were a professor. Can you tell us a little about your journey from professor to breath work expert?
Yes. So greetings to my fellow educators. I am a recovering professor of
Mm.
11 years, and I was an English professor for 11 years, and I started my breathwork journey. Actually, it was it was because most of my life I never really learned positive ways to deal with stress. My most of my young life, it was the opposite of healthy. I was not going to go exercise because, hey, you get sore and sweaty, and that's no fun. And basically all the things that we might consider to be positive ways to deal with stress or to manage stress, I ran away from.
Mhm.
But it will catch up with you. And so I and actually it was in graduate school I decided, okay, I've got to figure this out.
Mhm.
I've got to figure out better ways to do this. I was going to the doctor and they were saying, oh, Mr. Coomer, you've got really high blood pressure, and
Mhm.
my I had a lot of bad habits. And so I started exercising, and hey, you know what? Maybe there really is something to that after all. And so I started trying to eat right and do these things, but I still had a lot of anxiety.
Mhm.
And so I started to try to meditate. I've heard all kinds of good things. I had
Mhm.
a friend of mine take me through some meditations, and I found out that I had a lot of struggles with meditation. And mostly because, I mean, I always joke, you just sit there, right? And you don't think about anything really. I mean, it's just, as soon as I closed my eyes, I was like, am I done yet?
Mhm.
So I started to research ways to meditate better, and that's where I found breath work. And as is my way, and I think we as educators, we can kind of understand this. When you really are fascinated with something, you just have to learn more, and you learn
Mhm.
more. And before you know it, you're like, hey, let me teach you this thing I know. And
Yeah.
it's just part of, I guess it's in our blood. But I would say it was back in 2016 that I started to do it professionally. And I would sort of just do it on the side. It was something that I did in addition to, maybe I do it on the weekends or things like that. I would teach classes and workshops.
Mhm.
But in 2020, I had a sabbatical and I published my first book on breath work. And it did really well. And so, much to my surprise, it actually went really well. And so, the demand grew to the point I was doing two full-time jobs.
Mm.
And so I thought, well, let's see how this goes. So, I've been doing breath work as a profession now for a little over a year, without going back. I don't miss grading papers. So, but I still work with a lot of people just from every walk of life who are dealing with um, just the anxieties and the stresses that come along with life in general. And I know there's a lot in academia because that's where I'm from.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't think it's getting any better. So, how does breath work help us with our stress management?
So the interesting thing is, everyone that's watching, right? So if you're watching this, if you're hearing this, the way you're breathing is influencing your nervous system. And of course, your nervous system influences everything within your physiology, your psychology, hormones, all these things.
Mm.
That is intimately connected with your breathing, because we have this connection when our nervous system senses that we're in a stressful situation. Our physiology will change. And I know what everyone does here for a living, but there was a time whenever there was really only two professions, hunting and gathering, right?
Mm.
And so it suited us to be in a state of action. Sometimes we call it the state of fight or flight. A lot of times we get that stressed out that we're literally in that state. But we were either in an active state or in a relaxed recovery state. And generally, you know, there's an overlap between the two, but generally you're doing one of these two things. Well, the problem is our psychology, or psychologically, we can't distinguish between like a bear that's chasing after us, or all this deadlines and all these different things that are going on in our lives. And so our nervous system tries to help us by shifting our state to more of a stress state, more of an active state. That's where we get all the stress hormones, higher blood pressure, higher heart rate, higher blood sugar, a lot of these things, because it's trying to put us in a place where we can take physical action. That's what our species has always been, a species of taking physical action. Well, of course, we're sitting there at our desk trying to grade papers and reply to emails and put out all the fires of, the committees and all these things that we're on. And what happens is our nervous system's trying to push us to physical action, but we have mental action. And the way breathing works is that it's one of the very few things that connects our conscious actions, so the things we have conscious control over, with the things we don't have conscious control over. So for instance, I don't have conscious control over my heart rate. I can't just think, okay, beat faster or slower or reduce blood pressure. You can't just think that. Now I can move my hands and feet, right? But one of the things that I can also do that influences the nervous system for blood pressure, for heart rate, for blood sugar, all these things, is changing my breathing. And so just like I guess a simple way of saying it would be, if you're breathing like you're stressed out, you're actually speaking to the nervous system, hey, I'm stressed out. It's time to be stressed. And it goes both ways. So for instance, when you're stressed out, you may start to notice you start breathing heavy. Well, your nervous system is just assuming, okay, we're going to have to go run away from a bear, or we're going to have to, fight or something like that. That's what our organism was built for. But we can say, okay, I can change the way I breathe, and that will change the messaging to my nervous system. And so when I train, MMA fighters or first responders, educators, all different walks of life, ultimately what we're trying to do is match the breathing pattern to the state that we want to be in for whatever actions we're doing. And when you do that, you can see some incredibly profound changes in your health.
Wow. That is so neat, that connection between the mind and the body. And as you were saying, that breathing when you're stressed, that's how I know I'm
Oh,
stressed.
yeah.
It's like my breathing all of a sudden is shallow and it's up here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh, okay. And
Exactly.
yeah.
Well, and what's interesting is oftentimes we will work with people who will sit at a desk, and we'll see the feedback loop that comes from this. So, for instance, you're at a desk, you've got deadlines, there's somebody who's giving you trouble, you got that one student, right? Every semester there's at least that one student. And so all these things are informing your nervous system. Unconscious processes are taking place. And what will happen is, you'll start shallow breathing. So there is a right and a wrong way to take a breath, right? But you'll start breathing up here in the chest. And just for everyone who's new to this, if you're breathing up here in the chest and in the shoulders, that is a sure sign to send stress to your nervous system. Hey, we're running from a bear. This is bad, right? But it's also incredibly common because we're sitting down. Oftentimes we wear clothes that are a bit constrictive of our breath wave. And so this is kind of just, it starts to happen. Maybe you're sitting at a chair where there's armrests, and it naturally moves your shoulders up. And so you start breathing in the chest. So it happens. There's a lot of different reasons why it will happen. But what happens is that we'll start to notice, man, I feel stressed out. And then that'll make us breathe a little harder. And then we start to notice, man, I'm breathing hard.
Mhm.
And that stresses us out even more. And then we start to breathe faster. And you actually see a lot of correlation to really high levels of stress throughout the day. And this is why at the end of the day, we can sit at a desk all day long and you have every intention of going home and exercising. But as soon as you get home, you just feel exhausted. You're like, why do I feel exhausted? All I did was sit there all day. Well, yes, physically you weren't moving, but your physiology was giving you these high level of stress hormones all day long. And then you finally get to a place where you feel safe.
Mhm.
Your nervous system says, oh, okay, I can relax now. And so you start to have that crash of all of those stress hormones that are great for getting us in the gym, for getting us on the run, whatever else we need to do. So when we start to take control over where we put our breathing, when we start to breathe some relaxation, it's not like we're trying to take a nap, but when we start to breathe some relaxation into our life, so we're not constantly fluttering, on 10, maybe we're bringing it down to a 6 because we still need some energy. Then what we start to see is that you have more energy throughout the rest of your day. You're sleeping better, you're feeling better, you're actually able to make better decisions.
Mm.
Our brains, it's the human brain has this interesting thing when we're under stress. And again, it's because our organism has always been one that we take physical action. That's how we solved problems for most of our history. Well, when we're under stress, we don't necessarily need to think critically. We just need to, we call it fight or flight for a reason. There's really only two options. We're just do it or don't do it. And we see that in all kinds of different professions, people tend to make bad decisions when you're in that heightened level of stress. And of course, we're generally just not quite as friendly either when we're overly stressed. So I think we can all relate to that.
Yep. So if I'm understanding correctly, you can use your breathing to calm yourself down or adjust kind of your physical state for the activity that you're wanting to do?
That's right. And, generally we don't teach people exercises to become more active. So going into, we call it a stress state or the state of fight or flight, and it can get to that point. But I tend to teach people just think about, okay, you've got an active state and more of a relaxed state.
Mhm.
We do have techniques that can help you get, okay, I need a little bit of energy, but most of our techniques are to help down regulate, because the way our nervous system works is that it is always going to skew toward activation over relaxation. And that's just because our ancestors, you only had to get unlucky once.
Mm.
And so I would rather be overly stressed and not being eaten than getting a great night's sleep and then I'm tiger food. So when we use our breathing, so for instance, we know that there are breathing patterns that are related to being in a rested state. And so I train people to use techniques. Now, not every technique is going to work the same for every single person. But what we tend to do is we say, okay, so the first thing is you need to decide, how do I feel? And so this is a lot of times we kind of relegate breath work just to, you learn a few techniques and then that's what it is. But ultimately, you want to become more in touch with how you feel and become more aware of your internal state, which is very difficult. As easy and simple as that sounds, becoming aware of our internal state is often very difficult because we are chronically in a stress state. And so many of my clients will come to me later and they'll say, we started working on awareness early, and then we started working on some techniques, and we started to notice some changes. And now my baseline is so much more relaxed than I ever thought it could be. I didn't realize how much stress I was carrying around with me just in every day.
Yeah.
So when we use breathing techniques, yes, there's I think oftentimes the misunderstanding is that, okay, if you do this technique, then suddenly everything is supposed to change and there's no more problems. And it's just, kind of almost like clickbait, the one simple trick that,
Yeah.
those things. But the reality is, every single breath you take is doing something to your nervous system. It's
Mhm.
a message from your nervous system. It's a message to your nervous system. It's the one thing that you can control consciously. And then also, now that we're talking about it, maybe everybody's, oh, let me think about how I'm breathing. But you weren't doing that before we were talking about it. And that's good. So we can go to sleep. We don't have to worry about that sort of thing. It can keep going. So it's the one of those, it's the one of the few things that we have conscious and unconscious control over. So it bridges the gap between our conscious awareness. And so we can say, okay, I'm not really in a dangerous situation. I've got some deadlines,
Mhm.
and yes, there's some stress there. If I don't get these deadlines, if I don't make these deadlines, yes, there's negative repercussions, but it's not like, first of all, it's not like it's a life or death thing.
Mhm.
And then second of all, I know that I need to use my prefrontal cortex. I need to use my problem solving skills. And if I stay in this heightened state of stress, there's no way I'm going to do that. So, okay, so I'm going to use what I know because I'm noticing how I feel. I know that it's not the right state for what I'm trying to do. And so I'm going to use a breathing technique, or I'm going to check in with my breathing. Maybe I am breathing upstairs too much.
Mhm.
So how can I change my breathing to change my state? And
Mhm.
you know, then from there, I can take the actions that I need to take.
Mhm. Love that. And that is actually kind of funny. Someone shared a meme recently. It was like, can someone please tell my brain that like running from a tiger and answering an email are not the same? Like,
That's the funny thing, right?
ah,
Because on a certain level, they are. So this is the crazy thing. So for most of human history, we had the two biggest problems we had. We had, okay, succumbing to a predator. That was a very common thing, right? And then there was also being ostracized from the community, right? And that is the one that we still face the most. We don't obviously, I mean, unless you're living a really exciting life, right? But we tend to just face this ostracization. And for our ancestors, that was feared worse than dying by any other means, because
mm,
now you're alone, you're going to die alone. There's all kinds of psychological issues that come with that. So there really is a on a biological level, on a real fundamental level, there really is a danger that our unconscious mind picks up. If
mm,
I don't carry these things out at the highest of my ability, this will reflect on me in a negative way, and it may damage my position in the community. I may be ostracized.
mm,
So I always let my clients know there's some of that. There's some rationale to that. Now, we have a tendency to make mountains out of molehills, you know, and so, as a former English professor, I remember proofreading every email that I wrote, because if I missed a comma or something like that, I was like, well, are they going to take back the job, and it was ridiculous. But I would there would be things that I would overthink. And of course, I always say that if rumination was an Olympic sport, I would be a gold medalist, because, you know, you were just overthinking things so often. And so there are styles of breath work that you can do for every day, just ensuring that you're not breathing in. And when I say breathing in, you're not, the action of performing a breath is not causing your physiology to be stressed. So
mm,
we call this area functional breathing.
mhm,
So for instance, when I work with clients, I will do a functional breath assessment. And we find out most people have a breathing dysfunction that they're not aware of.
mm,
It's just the same as posture. We have to constantly be working on our posture and our mobility, because the thing about our nervous system, it will find the easiest way to get the action done. It doesn't always do the optimal way. So it's interesting, actually, in college athletes, last year, there was a huge study that came out that showed that 90% of college athletes, and we're talking the healthiest people in the world, 90% of them had breathing dysfunctions.
Wow.
90%. And it holds true with my clients who are athletes. They commonly do. And so they're always like kind of, a little upset about that. I'm like, you are like you're a sports car of a human being. Just imagine if we get you breathing right, and then their performance even increases beyond that. But in education, it's very common because we sit down a lot, and we are also, another thing that we do is we mouth breathe all the time. Now, the reason for that is because we're lecturing, right? And so one of the things that we're not really aware of as educators is the fact that when you are speaking, you're often inhaling through the mouth, which will lead to shallow breathing. Okay. And then you're exhaling through the mouth. So you're exhaling a lot of CO2. Now, we don't have enough time to go through all the different cascading effects of what happens there. But simply by just choosing to try to inhale through your nose as you're lecturing, you can start to mitigate a lot of this breathing dysfunction. Because when we lecture, if you think about this in many ways, maybe we're not doing as fast as we might do if we're running from, a predator. But in many ways, we're going, right? We're breathing heavy with our mouth, and that spikes all the stress hormones. So anytime people talk about, all I did today, I spoke in, public speaking. Public speakers have some of the highest levels of cortisol, highest levels, because we often are just mouth breathing. So I train people to breathe through their nose and to use the proper breathing muscles. That is functional breathing. The next thing is, okay, so now that we're breathing with functional breaths, now, okay, so we need to learn that awareness I was talking about, really focusing in. And that's where ultimately you learn to meditate. It may not be through a traditional means, but ultimately, if you can sit down and start to observe how you feel, or just start to, what I do a lot of times, I'll say, if you have one of these, these smart watches or something like that, well, maybe when you feel stressed, look at your heart rate. And whenever you wake up, look at your heart rate. And then kind of a range of your heart rate through the day. And so if you don't know how you feel, where's your heart rate in conjunction with those things? And you can start to put together, okay, my nervous system is trying to activate versus my nervous system is trying to relax. And whenever you're maybe more nervous or stressed, you can start to say, well, okay, I'm aware of this. Now I'm going to use a breathing technique that we've worked on. Great. And I'm going to keep using that technique until I become aware of a change. Sometimes you can just use your heart rate. Sometimes people get really good at it and they can just notice, oh yeah, okay, I'm back. Great. Now let's go into the meeting and, or deliver the bad news. We do that as teachers, right? How am I doing in the class, teach? Well, you haven't handed anything in this semester, but I hate to give you this news. But we need to keep our cool when we're speaking to our students, when we're speaking to our colleagues. And so learning that, so we've got functional, then we have what we might consider messaging. I teach a philosophy called the language of breath. Of course, I developed it as an English professor. Maybe it's just part of me, but how we speak to the nervous system ultimately. And then after that, we have integrative breath work. And that would be the kind of breath work that you might say, I'm going to do a 15-minute session to just break through the rumination cycle. And a lot of times this would be more active breathing, circular breathing, long breath holds, things that are specifically designed to break you out of what I like to call the dopamine feedback loop, which is very common in the world that we live in today, especially because we have so much access to information. And I recently read a statistic. I forget how many gigabytes. It was like 72 or something gigabytes of information that we ingest every single day. And I think it was like 500 years ago, if you were the most educated person in the world, that would be how much information you absorbed in your entire lifetime. And so this has an effect on how our nervous system works, and is trying to manage all of this. So when we become more aware of our breathing, when we can breathe better, we can start to down regulate so we can relax a little bit more. Doesn't mean we're taking a nap in the middle of the day. I know we all need energy, but what we have at that point is usable energy, as opposed to ultimately wasted energy because we're in that anxious state.
Wow, that's so interesting. So I want to ask you, I think this is related and I see a lot about it is like ice baths and things like that. And I'm guessing breath work is very connected to doing that. So can you tell us a little bit how like what is it with ice baths and breath work and all of
Yeah.
that and stress management?
So there's a lot of different people who use ice baths for a lot of different reasons. Athletes have used it for ages, and you can go back to the time of Hippocrates, and he was recommending ice baths for certain conditions. When I train, for instance, especially when I train first responders, I train them with ice baths, and the reason for this is when you get into the cold. So there's two things, major things that happen when you get into an ice bath. One is that the hypothalamus in your brain says, okay, we are now entering into a lethal situation.
Mhm.
And the hypothalamus is not, it's not aware that, okay, Naomi is going to get out of the ice bath in a minute and a half. The
Mhm.
hypothalamus is like, okay, this will kill us. We got to get out of here. So it will activate certain processes in your brain that make you want to get out of that situation as fast as possible. What that does is it ramps up the nervous system with that fight or flight side. We call it the sympathetic dominant side. So it ramps that up,
Mhm.
just like when you're in a stressful situation at work or maybe in traffic. And so what we do is we get in the ice bath so that we can learn how to deal with a spike in the sympathetic dominant side of your autonomic nervous system. So really saying, okay, this is a safe way to put myself into an incredibly stressful situation. Now, I've got the stimulus. Can I practice what I know with breath and try to become a little bit more relaxed in the ice bath? Now, some people will say, oh, it makes me feel warm and all that. Believe me, I've been doing this for, I guess, 7 years professionally. It doesn't make it, the cold is always the cold. What I want out of it for my clients, and what, especially when I train people, we're looking for what we call stress inoculation. We're saying, I want you to train with the stressor. I want you to really get used to, this is what stress feels like,
Mhm.
and this is how to mitigate it with your breathing. And I want you to get really good at that. So we oftentimes will recommend cold showers. Now, there's all kinds of other benefits. There's a lot of health benefits to the cold as well.
Mhm.
And for beginners, I normally need to say, okay, when you take an ice bath, it boosts your immune system. There's a lot of research on immune system will get a boost, inflammation goes down, a lot of these other things. But ultimately, for the vast majority of use in breath work, for me at least, I'm training a person to deal with stress, because when you get into an ice bath, there's also a what they call a global secretion of norepinephrine,
Mhm.
and it's a heavy secretion of norepinephrine, and that is the same neurochemical that we see in a high dose of when we talk about feeling anxiety.
Mhm.
So the stress goes up, dopamine feedback loop, it goes for a little while. And then eventually, when your nervous system says, okay, Jesse hasn't solved this problem or whatever, or hey, there's a major catastrophe in front of me, we get a global dose of norepinephrine. So we're replicating the same brain chemistry as we would have in a regular life experience,
Mhm.
and we're doing it safely, and we give that person the opportunity to notice, wow, can you downregulate your nervous system? Yes, you can. Wow, isn't that amazing? And if you do that on a daily basis, you become a person who is really in tune with the stress response and how to mitigate that stress response. So we have, for instance, when I teach at some of the training academies for first responders, they'll have like the credo, or I don't, these things they memorize whenever they're cadets or when they're coming up, and they can't remember any of them whenever they first get in. And so then we say, okay, let's do the down regulation protocol. Let's do the breath, and then they can. And it's a very common thing because, again, that's our physiology, because our organism is based on action, not necessarily critical thinking when we're taking action. So yeah, ice bathing is a fantastic modality for many reasons, but as we use it, or at least as I use it in breath work, it is a stimulus so that we can work with the stress response, so we can start to master that and really almost make friends with it.
Okay. I love that. That makes so much sense. Like I've heard like all the physical benefits like you were talking about. Um, oh, I just lost your video.
Uh-oh. I apologize.
Well, I can still hear you.
Let's see here. All right. Okay. Can
Um,
you see me?
nope, not yet.
Oh, no. Okay. Here we go.
There
I
we go.
apologize. I
All
had
right.
a,
Um, I've heard of the physical benefits, but I love your description of using it like as an inoculation because I have a science background, and so I'm like, okay, that like totally makes sense of this exposure in doses, so that when I'm dealing with stress, I know that feeling and I know what to do. So that,
yeah.
yeah.
One of the things that I always try to help with my clients is just to let them know that awareness is the foundation of all positive change. And once you're aware, okay, this is what it feels like. A lot of times it's just much of the problems when it comes to stress response is the fact that we feel as though we're suffering from something that's foreign and alien, and we just want it to stop. And there are reasons for that. The biological reasons that we want to escape that stressful situation, and that's why we have all the stress hormones. It's just that when you become more aware of how it feels and how you can make a positive impact on it using your breathing, you start to not, the boogeyman isn't so scary anymore.
Yep. Yeah, I love that. Like it takes away that fear piece of it. That's awesome. So where do you suggest that our burnt out teachers start their healing journey? Like where do you begin with breath work?
Well, I wrote a book called A Practical Guide to Breath Work. And the reason I wrote this book was because it didn't exist for me. There's a lot of voices in the world of breath work, but I wanted some kind of a real practical guide to do it. So the way this book is set up, the first half is kind of my journey, and it describes that modern human condition for my humanities people. Well, everybody, you remember literature class, right? The human condition, and we have a different human condition. There is an additional thing that ultimately we're dealing with, and I talk about the science behind that. But the second half of the book, the cool thing, I wrote it as you could read the first half while you're working with the second half. The second half is just techniques, and you can start your breathwork practice today. Also, I do have online course if you want to take a deep dive or even a not so deep dive. I've got the online course that I believe I sent to you is the foundations of the language of breath, which will give you in under an hour a really good comprehensive on your autonomic nervous system. There's about 4 really powerful techniques in there. And if you want to take it even deeper, there is the complete 7-day course on the language of breath. If you really want to fully understand how the conscious and unconscious processes are working together, that is how to do that. That takes you to the functional, through the through those what I call the language of breath, those things, being aware and using a technique in the moment, and then even the sessions that are a little longer. We might call those integrative sessions, those ones that are really good for breaking through that stress, that stress response. Those are out there, and ultimately, when you start, you may feel overwhelmed, but I like to remind people that breathwork is a practice. It's not a performance. You will not be graded on this, my friends. It is something that we have to continuously work on each day. There's never a time when you're just fixed, because every single breath that you take between now and the day that you die informs the nervous system of something. It is speaking to that nervous system, and how, even if it's habitual, even if it's you kind of let your breathing on autopilot, you can retrain that breathing to breathe relaxation and calmness into your life. And when you're doing that, you're far more confident, you're far more able to think critically and to be able to focus under pressure. And you don't have to take an ice bath. Okay. All right. You don't have to take an ice bath. That is one option, but there are so many things you can do with your breath. So check me out. I'm on it's jessecoomer.com. You can find all of those things.
Fantastic. And yeah, so everyone will have the link to that course, which that's fantastic. That's a great place to start. And that's kind of how I started. It was with a course.
Mhm.
Breathwork was a piece of it. And I can say like it has, like you said, it's a practice, and through practicing it, it's kind of become a natural response for me in like stress situations. I just kind of don't think about it now. I just start breathing.
Yeah, yeah. It's a matter of just making it a part of your life. And when it's a
Mhm.
part of your life, it's just like most things. At first, it takes a little bit of time to integrate it into your life, but once it's in there, it's just natural.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. So I have three more questions for you that are just on the fun
Please.
side of things. So
Yeah.
I'd love to know, what are you reading? What are you watching? And what are you listening to?
Oh, great question. Well, I'm in the process of rereading a book called The Wedge by Scott Carney. It is, of course, it's all about a lot of the things that I'm into. So I've it's basically about how to use the stress response. And yeah, I nerd out about it. It's just all I do.
All right.
I'm sorry. So what book, what am I reading? What are
Watching and
mhm.
listening to.
Okay, what am I watching? Currently, oh man, I don't even know. I watch a lot of just cheesy sketch comedy, and
Okay.
so just kind of the Key and Peele and things like that. I just continuously kind of rotate through. And then what am I listening to? I just started to listen to Peso Pluma, which it's this awesome like it's like a modern day mariachi band. I know that you might be like, why would you listen to a mariachi band? Listen to Peso Plume. He's really,
Okay.
actually really good, and I'm gonna go even see him in concert. So
Oh,
never
wow.
thought that would happen, but I'm currently listening a lot to him.
That's cool. Nice. I have to look up that book too, because I mean, I work in the stress
You're gonna
management
love it. Yeah.
field. So I'm like, anything related to that, I'm like, yes. So I could totally relate. Well, I want to thank you for joining us, Jesse. This has been fantastic. And thank you to our audience. If you have not caught our other interviews of other experts just like Jesse, who are experts in stress management in some form, he focuses in breath work. We have some that focus on nutrition, some in emotional behavioral therapy. So there is something for everybody in this summit. So please check out the other interviews, share them. This is for everybody. I know that we have focused on education, but we're in a stressed out world. So feel free to share beyond your educational circles, because we all deal with stress. So find the rest of our interviews. You will have a link to Jesse's course, a great, generous gift to you. And thank you, Jesse, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Have a great day, everybody.